Well, welcome back. I'm Neal Gorenflo, co-founder of Shareable, and we're here again with my friends from Common Trust on our series of conversation about their new book, Assets of Common, Stories of Business and Community Leaders, Remaking the Economy from the Ground Up. It proposes an ambitious yet pragmatic path for scaling this shared and steward ownership economy and backs up this vision with deeply researched case studies and analysis. Today is episode 5, our final episode, and we're back again with Chelsea Robinson, Charity May, and Jay Standish. And our last 2 episodes, we talked about the structural aspects of these ideas. Today, we explore opportunities for action and also looking forward, the future, what might be the future of this trend, this movement. So welcome back. And you guys have introduced yourselves in now several episodes, but just quickly share your name, title, and affiliation for review, and anyone joining new to our series. Full bios are in the show notes. Jay, let's start with you.
Thanks, Neal. My name is Jay Standish. My background is as an entrepreneur in the community living world. And as far as this project goes, I'm a senior researcher and a co-author of the book.
Yeah, Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Robinson. I'm a project manager and book editor in this project.
And Charity.
Hello, everyone. Charity May. My background is in investment capital markets, impact investing, and I'm a senior researcher and co-author for this book.
Great. Thank you. And let's just dive right in, get to the heart of the matter. Chelsea, what are the key actionable strategies which the book emphasizes?
Thanks, Neal. So this book covers a lot of ground. It's like a Mary Poppins bag of strategies. Some of those strategies are more relevant to investors. Some of them are more relevant to civic innovators or people working in municipalities. And a lot of the book is really relevant to business owners. And there's also even relevant strategies that are for peer-to-peer finance at the individual level as well. But overall, what we really hammer home in the finale of the book in part 4, Opportunities for Action, is we really centrally focus on 2 main strategies. One is a holding company strategy, and the other is a shared services strategy. And as you also have heard us talk about in previous episodes, we really identified throughout this research that those were incredibly successful strategies for people who already manage assets in the American economy to turn to the people next to them or above them, behind them, beside them in whatever configuration, either in their region or in their supply chain or value chain, and say, what can we do together that we can do better, faster, more competitively than alone? And so holding company strategies are part of that, using a conscious consolidation approach with values at the forefront, or looking side to side, up and down to see who can we share our functions with, how can we create a shared services strategy that allows us to save money or optimize our processes. Now, beyond that, obviously, we've got a lot of different possibilities around generating new mutual financing systems, or all of these more elaborate strategies that help this bigger economic transition occur. But really what we focus on is the tangible and actionable opportunity for someone who manages assets today to turn to the person next to them and consolidate in some way and connect so that we can actually activate some benefits together.
Yeah, that's great. One thing I love about the work that you do and what you've written about in the book is these are not exactly like that innovative or new. They're just maybe not utilized enough in different parts of the economy, and maybe especially with small and medium-sized businesses that could really benefit from it in an economy that's experienced a lot of market concentration, industry concentration. And so, Jay, you wrote about a recipe for implementing a steward-owned holding company. So let's go into the holding company thing a little bit. Yeah, what's the recipe?
Sure. So there are sort of 2 concepts that we're marrying together here. One is a small business holding company, and one is steward ownership. And so the recipe, if you wanted to do something like this, is that small businesses, if they're profitable, can actually be bought using debt. You can get a loan. The SBA provides loans for buying small businesses based on the fact that they're producing positive cash flow. So you take over the business and you use the positive cash flows that are coming off of the business to pay off the loan that you took out to buy the business in the first place. So that's like just to wrap people's head around, how do you buy a business if you don't have millions and millions of dollars? That's how it's done.
So that's the way you can get started without having any cash yourself and building a holding company, right? You can buy business after business and put them together.
Exactly. You do that one time, you do it multiple times. And so that's the process of building a holding company that is a single entity that owns multiple companies inside of it. Think of it as an umbrella company. And so a steward-owned holding company is when that umbrella is owned in a steward ownership structure. So it will have not only benefit to employees, customers, local community, international community, it might have a cause or charitable purpose that it's focused on, as well as providing a quality of service, depending on what the company is. And so the ownership benefits of that company will be distributed to a broader group of stakeholders. And there'll be a focus not just on the financial output of the company, but also the tangible output of the company in its day-to-day operations, producing real value and impact to people in the world. So that's the basic idea. And it can be built sort of one portfolio company at a time to build a steward holdco. Generally speaking, a lot of the other solutions that we looked at in the book can also be implemented inside of that, such as shared services, supply chain finance, etc. But the basic idea is a group of companies that are held in common for a greater purpose.
And tell me a little bit about how the goalposts shift from default economic goals when combine these two things together. How does removing the focus on an exit and sale change the incentives and desired outcomes for steward-owned holding companies?
Sure. So steward-owned companies will take the sale of the company off the table. They say it is legally defined in the core agreements of this company that we will never sell the company. And so that really changes the economic logic of ownership from, hey, let's grow this company, like a startup, for example. The economic logic is for the founders and the investors is let's create this rocket ship and grow it exponentially to the point where we can sell it for hundreds of millions or $1 billion. And then we make money when we sell the company. It might not even be profitable. A lot of these startups from Silicon Valley don't even make $1. They don't produce any profit at the point at which they're sold. They've never produced any profit. It's just all based on the future value. And so this is a much more grounded approach that we're talking about. We're talking about producing real value day in and day out and producing positive cash flows in the form of profit. And so the economic logic, rather than be focused on the value of the company itself, it instead is focused on the value that the company creates, both financially and tangibly in the world. When you take terminal value is the end value of the company, but the enterprise value, when you take that enterprise value off the table, then it's the cash yields that the whole business needs to be based around. And small business holding companies are suited for that because it's acquiring companies that produce regular cash flows.
I think there's another element to that too that's part of why it's such an amazing proposition for bootstrapping economic transformation is that so many holding company strategies, and like you said, Neal, none of this is new, but so many of these strategies are employed by large corporate institutions that do have a very extractive focus and where their kind of financial profile is really interested in ever increasing that growth curve and profit margin at the expense of the quality of the service or product and at the expense of the people also who are participating in those companies. And this is really flipping that around and making it about reinvestment in the wiring of the company itself. Like a lot of the reasons why I think steward-owned holdcos are something that we're talking about so actively, and just the word holdco by itself is because holding companies on their own are often wired to just perpetuate that level of extraction, to create an ever-increasing amount of wealth for a smallish or largish group of stakeholders or shareholders that have been defined as those who are part of that holding company. But as soon as you add that stewardship layer, you get this enshrined legal requirement to create value for something bigger than the entity or some bigger purpose, or maybe even the local community, however that may be defined. And so you not only transition from extraction to reinvestment, but you also transition into enriching everybody around that company. And so rather than most of today's companies that we look around, and a lot of people are really feeling disenfranchised by corporate activity in the United States and really feeling hard done by this like ever increasing distance between the haves and the have-nots. A lot of what these more steward-owned holding companies could create for us as they scale and become really competitive alongside those big extractive giants is, that they can also help us really create positive externalities rather than negative externalities with their corporate behavior, which is something very special and different than what we often see in business today.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love that idea. What would be, Chelsea, I just wanted to ask you, what would be some of those positive externalities?
One way to put what Chelsea just said is you have the financial ownership, and then you also have the real world impact of the business. Imagine we take every company in the world and we convert it to employee ownership. So we extend the number of people that get to benefit from the cash profits from that company. Great. We have better wealth equality now, but we're still destroying the planet. We would still have the problem of deforestation and pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. So we've solved one problem, but we haven't solved another. And so the positive externalities come into play when we say, okay, we actually need to change the physical operation of what we're doing in the world, not just who benefits financially. And so when we start changing the way that these companies are operating, where we get our energy from, where we get our food from, that's the other side of the steward ownership coin, is really focusing on the actual activities of the company and whether it makes a positive or a negative impact in the real world.
So for that positive environmental externality, you could have in your steward ownership documents like an obligation to purchase responsibly or donate money to a nonprofit that reforests certain areas or does landscape regeneration. This can be part of the formula too then. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think that this is also in the United States, steward ownership is often formulated in being owned by a charitable entity or being owned by a purpose trust or trust ownership. But outside of the United States, I think the sentiment behind this is present in a lot of incredibly large-scale initiatives. And I think about the Sumitomo Keiretsu example charity with regards to how the founders actually enshrined like really wholesome values and purpose for that entity, and that they've lasted long after those founders have gone because of this kind of bigger purpose that was driving that entity. I'm curious if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, that's right, Chelsea. That one of the thoughts that was coming to me as you and Jay were sharing was that the enshrining of purpose for the enterprise is it's beyond the financial return, and in some cases, even beyond just the immediate impact to the employees themselves for that particular enterprise. It's almost looking at what is this enterprise contributing to the larger society? That was the question that, in the case that Chelsea just mentioned, for Sumitomo, 400 plus years ago, there was a desire and obligation, a moral obligation for the company to see that their impact in their society and on the planet and with the people that they're operating in was in service to this greater good. So that's definitely something that I think steward ownership, as Jay was alluding to, the steward whole model and concept, it's a way to really start putting the building blocks in place to have that conversation here in the United States about what is the purpose of this business enterprise and how might that expand more broadly to be in service to a larger, greater whole.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was also thinking about the positive externality of more employee ownership and decision making and control and within enterprises, how that helps can be a foundation for building civil society too and citizenship. We talked a little bit about that in a prior episode. Cherry, I wanted to go a little bit further too. What case studies could provide inspiration for someone listening to this to apply these strategies in other areas? Who is this relevant for? I know you've written about municipal applications.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about it during this series that's in the book is the Urban Wealth Fund model.
Mm.
An urban wealth fund is a model where governments, regional municipalities actually employ a holdco legal structure to hold municipal assets that exist solely for the public benefit, for public good. And the holdco structure itself is just like any other holdco where you have this umbrella company. The assets that are held in a particular municipality, maybe they're held across different agencies, they're aggregated together, but that municipality contracts with or partners with an independent third-party asset manager. And I want to make the distinction that an urban wealth fund is slightly different from what we might hear more about in terms of sovereign wealth funds, which are investment vehicles that are designed and managed by governments and nations. An urban wealth fund is really looking at what are the real assets, the hard assets within a community that may not have to be activated. It could be buildings, land, access to utilities, and the holdco structure in partnership with an independent third-party asset manager supports the initiative that is put in place for the development of those assets to actually serve the public good. So it could be, for example, identifying that there's vacant land that has not been activated. Can that land be made available for developing affordable housing or whatever the public benefit need is in a particular area or region? How can these assets be activated to support that and developing a development plan to implement that? One of the challenges that the Urban Wealth Fund seeks to solve, and we talk about the putting assets to work incubator that has been working with various municipalities, various cities to launch more of these urban wealth funds across the country. One of the challenges is that many governments do not actually have a market value tied to the assets themselves. And so they're either on the books in the government, they're on the books for a historical value that has no relevance today. But so most governments, if they're trying to think about what to do with a particular asset, one of their options is selling the property or selling the asset, and then it leaves the public sector, it enters the private sector. While that in and of itself is not a bad thing, we talked about purpose and intention. The purpose and intention, the ability to manage that is lost in many cases. And the outcome of that benefit is concentrated to a party of very few. So this whole model, first by supporting the governments and municipalities to actually identify what is the fair market value for these assets and what might they be able to create for our community, tied with the governance mandate of the outcome must provide a public benefit, is a really interesting blend of private sector for-profit models mixed with public service and public duty. And I want to also note that in this model, the governance and decision-making in terms of identifying that independent third-party asset manager is a really critical component of the design to separate what we talked about earlier, separating governance and the operational decision-making to allow for, I should say, to ensure that short-term political interest does not get in the way of what will likely be a lot more long-term pursuit towards creating a public benefit for the community. Really interesting case study. You can learn a lot more about it reading that chapter in the book. But again, a neat way to blend together this whole cool concept, but highlighting and identifying how the public sector, how civic enterprises can also participate in this work in supporting our citizens in honoring and managing the commons.
Yeah. And I guess it's also worth mentioning we're having this conversation about the book and we're touching on some things. Yeah. Just anyone listening, the book is available in PDF form for free. So if you want to go deeper, have at it. Yeah. Jay, I want to go back to you for a kind of how-to question. And again, you wrote about how to start a shared services company. Walk us through that.
So starting anything new, you need to get product market fit. So you have the product, or service, the value proposition, the thing that you're actually creating in the world, and it's the solution to some kind of problem. And then you have whose problem is it? Who are the customers? Who are the stakeholder? Who are the constituents for whom you are solving their problem? And you need those to make sense together. So most shared services groups are started by either an individual or an organization and a group within that organization that is embedded in that underlying membership group or constituent group of there's going to be multiple entities who have the same problem. And it's important that those entities have incentives aligned such that they're willing to collaborate together. If it were a bunch of very competitive businesses that were like, I don't trust you, or I don't see how this would work out without me losing some competitive edge I have against you, it's probably not going to work for a shared services organization. And some of that depends on just the culture of that industry. The constituent group needs to make sense. And then you might have a very collaborative industries, but you say, hey, our solution to you is we think that everybody should wear green t-shirts and we're going to create this shared services group that creates green t-shirts. So like, that's not relevant to us. That's not helpful to us. Finding the right solution is really important, and choosing the right kind of value is important. And usually these things arise at the same time. It isn't usually like someone's like, I'm going to start a shared services group in general, and I'm going to run around trying to find the right industry to do it and try to find the right solution to do it. It's usually someone says, hey, I see an opportunity in this industry for this solution. And then it goes from there. And then it's really a lot about building a coalition of buy-in from a sort of critical mass of early adopters to say, yeah, we would do that if you created that solution, and just getting momentum and building traction from there.
Yeah. And usually the people involved, often the entities involved, often are already familiar with each other. So they share a common problem, but also a history together too. So Charity, what case studies do you feel exemplify this and could provide inspiration for someone listening in and to get started on these approaches?
Yeah, I'm going to touch upon one shared service that is really critical to the circulation and, say, the vitalization of the economy, and that is capital funding. Having immediate access to funding sources for a business or a community to be able to act. And in the book, we highlight a number of different structures that center around there being, I would say, a healthy, friendly relationship with a funding partner. So in the case of Madrigal Cooperative Corporation, this is a multi-stakeholder cooperative, but one of the original cooperatives to form, which was in response to the needs of the smaller individual cooperatives, was a credit union. And that bank being established to meet the specific needs of those cooperatives. Another model that we highlight is in the Sumitomo Keiretsu example, which is, just to briefly recap, the Kritsu concept of model is that there are diversified business industries that are loosely affiliated through a few different ties. One of them being cross shareholding, another one being there being social cohesion among the presidents through President's Council, and also there being a touch point with trading companies that sit in the center of the ecosystem, but also the banks. And in the case of Kritsu, the bank plays a really important role and a slightly different role than what is allowed in the United States. I will name that. But in the sense that banks with the Kritsu model, they're both shareholders, investors in the businesses, but also the lender. And so that gives them the ability to be a broker of information, but also an advisor at any given point in time to support the businesses and enterprises as they're growing. Jumping back over to the cooperative model, we also note in the Namaste Solar cooperative ecosystem, which we highlight in another episode we talked about, one of the evolutionary enterprises was a credit union as well. But then there was also an investment fund that was formed. And the idea of the investment fund was that there is a need for pooling capital from impact-minded investors in a vehicle that would allow for investments in real estate and investment in these small businesses as well, that was serving a different purpose than a credit union, right? Which gets there, it's a depository institution. So the capital that's being aggregated is slightly different than an investment fund. So even within that ecosystem, there were two different sources of capital being provided to meet different needs, but within that industry and for those businesses themselves. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to think creatively about how we structure different ways to bring different types of capital and different types of investors together to participate in building this infrastructure.
Yeah, it's always good to have a bank on your side, right? Yeah, Charity, want to go further and just ask you, thinking about these possibilities about holdcos and shared service cooperatives and some of the other solutions in the book, what is a low-hanging fruit or fertile ground for folks to explore this from your point of view?
I think some of the fertile ground is in part in starting where you are and starting with what you have. So going back to the example of the Urban Wealth Fund, I think it's actually an interesting analogy to this question in the fact that the assets that are held in common, they're there, they exist. But the first step is actually doing an inventory to assess what is it that we have to work with before we get to the visioning and the designing of what might be possible. And so I think fertile ground for whether it is a small rural community or a group of small business owners that are looking to transition eventually, they're looking to retire, even investors that have a passion and desire to see that this different way of interacting and operating and building an economy work out. Where are you proximate to this broader vision? And what are the assets that you can bring to the table? I think for investors, obviously the financial capital is imperative role in actually moving these ideas forward. So the call to action to them is, let's think creatively about the structures that need to be formed to allow for your capital to play a role in the whole model, in the cooperative model, whatever that structure is that particular community or group of businesses need to thrive. And I also highlighting, we've talked a lot about small businesses, and I will just expand that into thinking about the rural context. We are in an interesting moment of history where over the next 10 to 15 years, the transition that's going to happen in terms of retirement for small businesses, but also land. in the United States, land that is owned for agricultural production, or is held in family, held in trust. The business is an asset, land is an asset, and they're participating in complex ecosystem. And the opportunity is, again, to bring those assets to the table with the mindset of saying, what is the long-term purpose and goal and opportunity that we have to heal the planet, to take care of people, and to create products and goods and services that generate a more beautiful life,
Yeah.
for lack of better terms.
Yeah. That's a nice segue to our last question, which is looking to the future. And this is a kind of big picture movement question. And as we pointed out, Charity, the book points to a huge and highly relevant impact opportunity. What needs to be done to realize this opportunity? How would we make this better future? Leverage all these ideas in the book, make them more mainstream. This is roundtable question. So anyone who wants to chime in, yeah, Chelsea.
Yeah, I want to just kick us off here on this one by saying that we've really set out with this work to throw something into the future here. I think a lot of the concepts in this book will be very exciting for some people, but it's also worth saying that there's a huge community of people who are working on alternative ownership models, huge community of people who are working in the weeds, trying to transition their farm or their business or their assets. And this work is definitely that additional step. So we really want to invite people who are already in that modality and already in that knowledge base of understanding concepts of stewardship and shared ownership. Really want to give them this body of work as a gift to say, this is for you. This is for you to build something that is the next steps from what you've got. So we know a lot of folks through the Common Trust community, Purpose Foundation, etc. We know a lot of folks who are so hungry to figure out what's next for this movement. And so this is really our contribution to that question. Now, if Derek and Zoe were here, they would also say that this is about not waiting. This is about not waiting for the funders to get it. This is about not waiting for government to make policies that incentivize it. This is about not waiting for economic development agencies to build a strategy and write a white paper. This is about not waiting. And so in the spirit of not waiting, this kind of strategic direction for this body of work is an invitation to those who already manage assets, right? To say, can you put your assets into stewardship and take that next step of, can you then also consolidate them into something larger and bootstrap a faster and higher traction approach to economic transformation than just one asset at a time? Because what we're really looking at here is we're staring down the barrel, like you say, Charity, of this 15-year period of this tsunami of economic transition and assets changing hands. And the opportunity is not only to have every single one of those little assets change format, but also to have that sea change of, can we actually build the infrastructure that helps rise all those boats together? So can you, again, turn to our left, turn to our right, not wait, and look to other people who are managing assets today to say, can we reformat these and get closer to each other and enmesh some of what we're doing to create collaborative benefit, and then ultimately to then achieve a collaborative advantage, a cooperative advantage, and sort of outcompete some of these bigger monopolistic institutions that are otherwise dragging the economy behind them.
I love that. Yeah, the book as an invitation to builders, really, right? Not wait for the right conditions, for the right policy or so forth, but to use what we have now and work with those around us to move in this direction. Charity J, anything to add?
I would just say, as an example of that, there are a lot of employee-owned companies, worker cooperatives that already have one piece of the puzzle in terms of the financial ownership is more distributed. And they could choose to pull together and say, hey, let's take all of our smaller employee-owned companies and merge them together as a holdco and actually add another layer of stewardship that's not just about the financial, but also about the real world impact of the company into the core agreements of the structure. And so that'd be an example of they don't even need outside finance. They could all just agree to the values of the companies, merge them together. No dollars need to necessarily change hands, but this group could form a larger coalition and probably create some economic power that they could then use to help the next step in the movement, use their scale to make a more positive impact in the world. So those are the kinds of ideas that we're talking in terms of not waiting for someone else to give you permission to create value.
Yeah. Charity.
Yeah, maybe just to round out, I love the impetus of not waiting. Again, I think it's very much rooted in the history and heritage of how and where many of these models and ideas came. They came because the existing structure at the time when the economic conditions were not great. There was oppression, there was extraction. And so that is a sign for us who are actively building today and looking into the future to say, oh, really anything is actually possible. And in some of the work that I do within and across agriculture, using a really specific example of there's a gap, there's a need for hard assets in terms of infrastructure, actual infrastructure to support restoring our food systems, our fiber systems in a way that is, I said it before, but that is healthy and healing to our soils and healing to our planet. There's a need for a bioregionalism approach in developing that type of infrastructure. And I don't believe it's possible without the small businesses, other stakeholders coming together to pool their assets, what they can bring to the table to build. So there is a lot of opportunity, and just encouraging folks who are listening and who read the book that the time is now. Let's do it.
Awesome. That's a great place to stop. But before we fully wrap up, I just want to pass it to Chelsea. You have some acknowledgments, right?
Yeah, and thank you, Neal. I really want to also thank you for hosting this series. It's been so wonderful having you as part of this extended team. Really appreciate your insights and your stewardship of this conversation. For everyone out there who's just tuning in and trying to understand, okay, what is this project? Who's been doing it? So we've mentioned Common Trust a few times. Common Trust is an organization that Derek and Zoe run, who are really featured in episode 1. And they're really focused on helping to hold the hands of business owners who are looking to transition to stewardship and employee ownership in EOTs. And Common Trust is one of the organizations that's behind this, but also another organization behind this is the Purpose Foundation, Purpose US. It really specializes in thought leadership and field building around steward ownership specifically. So if you want to learn more about that, Purpose is a really great home for that. And then finally, this research team specifically that we stood up for this project is its own team. And so if you go to sharedownership.us, you'll learn all about this project. And this project is really led by this team on the call today. And this team goes by the name of Infrastructure for Shared Ownership, a research team that really has dedicated a good part of a year to building out all of the primary research that led to the creation of this book. And then finally, the sponsor of this project, the financial sponsor who made this happen, is One Project. And One Project is a family office based on the West Coast of the United States who's really passionate about creating, funding infrastructure for post-capitalism. And so we couldn't have had a more aligned funder to really steward and usher this forward into the world. So just wanted to call those out. If you want to take a look at any of those, feel free to go ahead. And that's a wrap. And thanks again, Neal. I know you're going to close us out for today. And again, that's a thanks from all of us here at the team, the research team behind this project, Assets in Common.
This concludes our Assets in Common conversation series. Thank you, Chelsea, Charity, and Jay, and the whole team at Common Trust and all the stakeholders involved that Chelsea mentioned. It was an honor to be part of this and host this conversation. It was also fun. I learned a lot, and I hope those that have followed along have learned a lot too. Thank you for joining us.